Have you ever wondered why mere mortals are given access to machines like Panigale V4Rs, M1000RRs, or Yamaha R1s? I'll let you in on a secret, it's not because the manufacturer thinks you need 220 horsepower. It's actually due to a little something called WorldSBK. I saw your comments on our last MotoGP video inspiring me to go and watch WorldSBK. Well, spoiler alert, I've been watching WorldSBK for the past 4 years. What I originally thought as a sort of red-headed stepchild to MotoGP actually turned out to have some fantastic racing action, some really cool characters, and bikes you can really relate to because you can go out and buy production versions of the machines you see racing on track. WorldSBK is a really interesting race series for motorcycles because, again, they're based on bikes you can actually go and ride. So when you watch the riders doing these things with these bikes, just remember, that could be you on your Panigale V4R. If it were a $200,000 race prep machine and you had an iota of the talent that Nicolo Bulliga has or that Top Rack has. So let's do a deep dive on WorldSBK, why you should be watching, how this series evolved and changed over time, and where it sits today to get you up to speed on the series so you can start watching. So let's do a quick explainer because when you look at a WorldSBK machine and a MotoGP bike, it might not be immediately apparent as to what the differences are. As mentioned in our MotoGP video, MotoGP represents the pinnacle of motorcycle racing. They're ground up prototype machines that are pushing the limits and physics of what two-wheeled racing can be. These are machines built from manufacturers from the ground up to go racing. You can't go and buy a MotoGP bike. They feature advanced aerodynamics and over 300 horsepower out of 1000cc V4 configurations, and the Yamaha inline 4. And they have lots of rules and regulations as to how they build these machines, what they can be made out of, and overall just trying to build prototype racing bikes that you can't go and buy on the showroom floor. The cost for a MotoGP machine is right around $2.5 to $3 million per prototype, with some bikes apparently going as high as $4 million per bike. Think about that the next time you see a MotoGP bike just being yard sailed in the gravel trap. But that's where WorldSBK comes in. Instead of being a ground-up prototype machine, the racing is done on homologated street bikes, albeit with a lot of modifications. And that's pretty sweet, right? As the racing gets more and more competitive, manufacturers keep making more and more extreme homologated bikes you can go out and buy. That's why an R1 from 15 years ago made about 170 horsepower and an R1 today makes 198. Or why Ducati completely lost their marbles and made a V4R variant of their V4 machine that makes like 240 horsepower for a production bike. Now, when it comes to production class racing, WorldSBK is the premier league. Racers and teams are utilizing bikes from Kawasaki, Ducati, Yamaha, and BMW, with Bimota being a sort of oddball we'll talk a little bit about later in the video. The bikes must be homologated for street use. That means the manufacturer has to make a minimum number to sell them to the public. In the first year, that's 125, that then bumps up to 250, and then ultimately 500 the year after that. That's why we see on the grid in 2025 a bike like the Bimota KB998, which again, they only need to make about 125 of those machines, competing against the Ducatis, the BMWs, and the other Japanese bikes. I just remembered I forgot to mention Honda in the bikes that are competing on the grid currently. They're not very competitive, so they slipped my mind. Sorry, Honda fans. Core components of the bikes, like the frame and the engine, must come from the production machine. You can't swap frames and motors willy-nilly. However, Superbike does feature some concessions that manufacturers can utilize to get up to speed against the competition. This has been a huge point of contention in this series over the last couple of years, as Ducati has been cleaning up shop with a very lightweight rider and a very talented rider, and then with Alvaro Bautista, but the motorcycle itself was just massively outgunning everything else in the category. That's why a lot of fans talk about last year's championship-winning bike, the M1000RR, at the hands of Toprak Razgatlioglu, one of the series' rising stars. We will talk about him in just a bit at the end of the video. But that bike was featuring a sort of super concessions, crazy BMW M1000RR with a borderline MotoGP frame. So Superbike does feature some concessions to allow manufacturers to tweak parts of the engine and frame to make them more competitive. Engines are limited to 1000 cc's for 4-cylinder bikes in Superbike racing. That's why you'll see special R variants of bikes like the Panigale V4, where in street trim it's sold as an 1103 cc in the V4S, but if you get the V4R, you get a 998cc V4 that revs to nearly 16,000 RPM and has a bunch of special stuff on it. Although production motorcycles are used, internal parts like cams, pistons, and valves can be changed to be more aggressive or more competitive. But the cylinder head, crankcases, and gearbox must remain stock as they come shipped. All the teams use a World Superbike approved electronics package as well. This helps eliminate some of the risk that a manufacturer could have a super advanced level of electronics that allows them to just sweep up the competition. I mean, Ducati's already pretty close to running a MotoGP bike and World Superbike. Let's not give them MotoGP electronics as well. Rider aids, of course, include traction control, wheelie control, launch control, quick shifters up and down, but using the traditional racer gear pattern where shifting up is actually pushing down and shifting back is pulling up. A lot of these bikes have World Superbike specific gear patterns as well, where neutral has a lockout. Compared to the models shown on the showroom floor, World Superbike machines typically push out about 30 more horsepower than the factory bikes, meaning about 230 to 240 horsepower for these machines, some pushing a little bit more than that. A typical World Superbike season is much smaller than a MotoGP season, usually only about 12 to 14 rounds per year, featuring races primarily in Europe. About 90% of the calendar is made up of races in Europe, and in recent years there's been less of an emphasis on the world side of World Superbike, with this calendar year featuring only Australia, the Phillip Island race, as the other World Series race instead of all of those in Europe. In years past, they featured races all over Asia, North America, South America, and many other parts of the world, but the series seems to be focusing more on Europe nowadays, which I think is a little bit of a bummer. But each race weekend consists of a lot of action, featuring 2 full-length races and 1 shorter sprint-style race, which is called the Super Pole race. Friday involves free practice, just like in MotoGP, where the riders are testing their setup, tire changes, and all those sorts of things. Saturday has the final practice session, followed by the Super Pole qualifying session, and then race 1. Sunday has the 10-lap Super Pole race, which can mix things up on the grid for the qualifying, and then it has race 2. Points are awarded in race 1, race 2, and the Super Pole race. Now, similar to MotoGP, there are factory teams and independent teams. And just like in MotoGP, factory teams are almost always the most competitive, featuring the best budgets, the best bikes, the best manufacturing data, and the best riders. All right, for this next part, let's see if off the top of my dome, I can list off all of the factory bikes and riders. Let's start with the Aruba IT Ducati team. That's a factory Ducati effort. You got Alvaro Bautista and Nicolo Bulliga on there. You, of course, have the Yamaha squad. I think they're the Pata Snack Yamaha team. You have Andrea Locatelli and I guess Jonathan Rea, but he's been out the whole time this season due to an ankle injury, so we haven't seen too much of Jonathan Rea, who is sort of the Marc Marquez of World Superbike, one of the most winningest rider in history in the series. You then have the Kawasaki World Superbike squad that features Alex Lowe's brother to Sam Lowe's, a Moto2 rider who made his way to World Superbike, and you also have Axel Bassani, who came over from Ducati to the Kawasaki squad. You then have the BMW factory effort, of course, with Toprak Razgatlioglu, the infamous Turkish star who is a 2-time champion in the series and one of the most talented riders in the world currently, and of course his fellow teammate Michael van der Mark. I remember that off the top of my head. And you also have the Honda factory racing effort with Iker Lecuona, who is a former MotoGP rider, and Xavi Vierge, who I believe is a Moto2 rider who came over to World Superbike. Independent or private teams in World Superbike use the same homologated bikes, but with differing levels of support. Some teams just have 1 rider, some teams have 2 riders, some teams are borderline factory adjacent and use support from the teams, but you'll see in a lot of the private endeavors in World Superbike, they're almost all using Panigale V4Rs because it is the most competitive machine. All right, so let's talk about some lore, because World Superbike racing is really damn good. There's so much more passing and action, and I really think that because the bikes don't have as much aerodynamic components and they're on Pirelli tires, which have a different wear quality than the Michelin's used in MotoGP, the racing is really damn top-notch in World Superbike. If you've ever found yourself a little bit bored watching MotoGP, check over Superbike. There's some really good action. The current era has been defined by these huge characters and battles between manufacturers and different riders. We've seen the rise of Toprak Razgatlioglu starting all the way back in 2020 on his Yamaha. Into the 2021 season, he became the world champion, dethroning Jonathan Rea after he had won like 6 consecutive titles. It was a really ridiculous run by Jonathan Rea on the Kawasaki. Alvaro Bautista nearly contested the title in 2019 with his Ducati, and that was really impressive to see. Over the following years in 22 and 23, Alvaro Bautista absolutely dominated the sport. He was winning everything left and right by like 10-second margins. So much so that fans were calling this the Ducati Cup and derisively saying that Alvaro Bautista's only advantage was the fact that he was so lightweight and able to just rip on the straights. And yes, that is true. Alvaro is a lighter rider, and that V4R has a ridiculous motor in it. I personally never believed those sort of derisive marks made by fans. I thought that Alvaro and the Ducati made a very comprehensive package, but nonetheless, the series decided to nerf him by adding an extra minimum weight to his bike and also decreasing the rev ceiling on the bike as well. That's when you enter the Toprak era of 2024, where he basically won every single race and every single thing, even despite missing, I think, 2 or 3 full rounds because of an injury he sustained at Magny Cours. Toprak is widely seen as the talent to watch in World Superbike. He is fantastic to see on the brakes. He does incredible things with the motorcycle, and if nothing else, you should watch World Superbike just to see Toprak riding because he's almost like Marc Marquez levels of genius on the motorcycle. BMW obliterated the Riders, Constructors, and Teams Championship in 2024, but that again was because they had some ridiculous concessions on their machine. In 2025, those concessions were unfortunately stripped from them because they won literally everything last year, and now we're seeing a bit more parity between all the different manufacturers. Yamaha's had a bit of an interesting ascend in 2025. Andrea Locatelli, I think, is sitting 3rd in the championship by the time this video is posting. Toprak is always up there, and of course, the sophomore year of rookie Nicolo Bulliga is having a fantastic year as well. Bulliga's really figured things out on the Ducati. He's a very fast, very confident rider, but he's been plagued by some technical issues lately, which really stinks too. One of the more interesting bits of lore about World Superbike is the fact that Toprak has always had this flirtatious relationship with MotoGP, and it seems like for the 26 and 27 years, he might actually make this move over to MotoGP with a sort of crazy move to HRC and World Superbike, and then testing the MotoGP bike, and then showing up in 2027 in MotoGP with the new changes for the 850 category, the new tires, so on and so forth. All I can say is, as a fan of both series, I would love to see Toprak over in MotoGP to see what he can do and see if he can really stack up against the top tier talents that you see in MotoGP. One unfortunate thing is that Toprak is a little bit older than a lot of the riders coming through MotoGP, and that does present an inherent disadvantage for him. But we've seen now with Marc Marquez being in his 30s, you can still be very competitive if you're fit and if you have that genius level of talent with the motorcycle. Another bit of lore about World Superbike that not a lot of people know, that people often say derisively that it's a sort of like graveyard of ex-MotoGP guys or Superbike guys who are just kind of playing around. I really think the talent field in World Superbike right now is the highest it's been in quite a bit of time. I mean, Nicolo Bulliga is a protege of Valentino Rossi's VR46 Academy, if memory serves me correctly. Alvaro Bautista, yes, he's getting older, but he's still an incredibly fast ex-MotoGP guy. You have Danilo Petrucci, an ex-MotoGP guy. You also have guys coming over from different parts of series and parts of the world. One of my favorite riders, Garrett Gerloff, came from the Moto America system, made his way to Europe, and had a really great time on Yamaha and BMW machinery. He's now on a Kawasaki, having a not so great year, but we hope things turn around for Garrett. All right, so let's take a quick stroll down memory lane and talk about the history of World Superbike and why it even exists. Because when you look at both series, MotoGP and World Superbike, you're kind of like, man, it's really hard for me to even tell the difference, but that's just how things have changed over time. Many decades ago, that was not the case. World Superbike began in 1988 as an alternative to MotoGP, or as it was known back then, the 500cc Grand Prix. In the early days, you had bikes like the Honda RC30 or the VFR 750R that was dominating with its V4 layout and gear-driven cams. Ducati entered with the 851 and the 888 and started planting some of those seeds of Ducati domination. American racer Fred Merkel won on an RC30 in the first years of World Superbike. Raymond Roche won the championship with a Ducati 851 in 1990. Then in the 1990s, Ducati basically became unstoppable. There were new displacement rules that allowed the Ducati's L-twins to be bumped up to 1000 cc's, while the four cylinders had to still be limited to 750. This extra displacement gave the Ducatis a wide range of torque, which is really what you need to accelerate off of apexes. During the 90s, Ducati won 8 World Superbike championships to give you an idea of how dominant they were. Honda had their RC45 and Kawasaki had the ZX7RR, but they were only able to secure 1 championship each and could never really match what the Ducatis were doing. The 916 from Ducati was really the game changer. The beautiful lines, the racing pedigree, need I say more? By the mid-2000s, there were a lot of rule changes that influenced how World Superbike was going to be run. The introduction of 1000cc machines for the 4-cylinder class really gave a resurgence to the field and really mixed things up. You had the Honda CBR 1000RR, the illustrious K5 Gixxer, and the Kawasaki ZX10. Ultimately, Yamaha would distill down from their MotoGP technology and introduce a big bang variant of their inline 4 to introduce to the 2009 model year for the Yamaha R1. And coincidentally, that was the year they took the championship with none other than Ben Spies, one of my personal favorite all-time racers. His elbows out riding style and his win-at-all-cost mentality, and the fact that he's from Texas, cements Ben Spies as legend status to me. And as we all know, the 2000s saw an explosion of race-bred motorcycles for both street and World Superbike. Things were really popping off. Then the 2010s saw these motorcycles get insanely advanced. I mean, the stratospheric jump from a 2009 era R1 to the 2015 plus R1 is pretty crazy. 6-axis IMUs, ride-by-wire throttles, advanced engine mapping controls, there was a lot going on. And it wouldn't be a World Superbike video without mentioning the GOAT of World Superbike, Jonathan Rea, who pretty much went uncontested for 6 years in the 2010s. He won 6 straight titles from 2015 all the way through 2020, racking up an insane amount of wins and an unbelievable record of podiums. Aprilia joined the party in the late 2000s with the RSV4, racing somewhat competitively, and then of course BMW entered as well. They had Tom Sykes early on that did pretty good things with the BMW, but they were often seen as a kind of weird package and never really quite connected for results on the grid. Actually, up until Toprak started winning for them and won their championship, they had gone basically winless for years. And really that brings us to the modern era. Ducati's changing the game with their V4. It's the most popular independent team bike to use. Toprak's doing amazing stuff with the BMW. We're seeing ex-MotoGP talent infiltrating the field and doing amazing things. World Superbike is a very interesting race series to watch. But one thing to keep in mind is that not many riders make the jump from World Superbike to MotoGP. It's been done a handful of times with varying degrees of success. But as I mentioned, a lot of people derisively think of World Superbike as the graveyard of MotoGP riders or rejects from that paddock, which I really don't think is a fair assessment. Yes, there's a lot of MotoGP riders that kind of had their heyday in the Premier class and then decided to play around a little bit in World Superbike before they were really ready to hang up their leathers for good, but I really think the series stands by itself as a proper racing series that deserves respect. These are some of the most talented riders anywhere in the world. And just because they're supposedly B grade compared to the A grade MotoGP riders does not mean you can keep up with them. I promise you. So even if it doesn't have the flash and panache of the ultimate premier class of motorcycle racing that is MotoGP, World Superbike feels a little bit more backyard, homegrown, and the racing really is second to none. If you want to see tons of passing, tons of hard action, really wonky and zany things happening on track, World Superbike is the series you want to watch. And hey, I recommend watching both MotoGP and Superbike because it's pretty rare that they overlap on the same weekend, so you can go and enjoy some excellent motorcycle racing all year round. And again, what's really cool is these are production-based bikes, and what happens on Sunday sells on Monday, and it's a big reason why Ducati and BMW are having such awesome sales with their top-shelf bikes like the V4R and the M1000RR. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this deep dive on World Superbike. I just wanted to put out this video because you guys did mention it a bunch on my MotoGP video, and trust me, I do watch World Superbike because I am a racing junkie. Thanks so much for checking it out. Who's your favorite on the World Superbike grid? Are you a Toprak stan, or do you still think Alvaro Bautista is the one to watch? Are you hoping that Jonathan Rea is going to come back, or that Yamaha's somehow going to start getting some results with Locatelli? Who knows? All I know is this has been a fun video to make, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later. Wake up! You're dreaming! You're dreaming! Wake up! Wake up! Wake up! None of this is real! None of it's real! None of it's real! Wake up! Keep watching Amy Noob.